A daring river rescue becomes a life-changing adventure when Sarah and Mike spot something unusual in the raging Blackstone River. Little did they know their shocking discovery would lead them to face their own mortality. The roar of the Blackstone River thundered in Sarah's ears as she gripped the muddy riverbank, her heart thudding in her chest. Beside her, Mike struggled to catch his breath, his usual confidence replaced with a look of raw focus. They had barely escaped the violent current that nearly smashed their kayaks into a boulder, and the shock of how close they'd come to disaster was still fresh. Scanning the swirling water, Sarah spotted an odd-looking sack bobbing among the debris and rushing foam. At first, she assumed it was just more trash swept up in the flood. But then a faint noise caught her attention, barely noticeable over the roar of the river. It was soft and muffled, but unmistakably there. A fragile, sorrowful whimper. She turned to Mike, her eyes wide with alarm. He looked back at her, his expression equally stunned. He'd heard it too. Despite the overwhelming rush of the river, they searched frantically with their eyes, trying to track the sound. As they glanced between the river and each other, a terrifying thought began to form. The whimper grew fainter as the sack floated farther downstream, carried fast by the unforgiving current. It was clear now. The sound was coming from inside that sack. "Mike," Sarah gasped, her voice tight with urgency. "Mercy! The sack! There's something alive in there." Mike hesitated for just a second, needing to be sure. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he bolted from the kayak and sprinted along the river's edge, keeping pace with the drifting sack. His ears strained to hear over the deafening rush of water. Each step sent his thoughts into overdrive, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "No way," he murmured, panting hard. But there was no denying it now. The helpless sounds were definitely coming from inside the sack. Time slowed as Mike ran, his mind racing even faster than his legs. What kind of animal was it? A puppy? A kitten? Or something wild? Maybe a baby fox or a raccoon? His heart twisted at each possibility. For a wild, desperate second, Mike thought about jumping straight into the raging water. The need to save whatever was inside that sack tugged at him hard. But even as the impulse hit him, he knew it was impossible. That current, which had nearly taken their kayaks, would pull him under in seconds. As he ran, a darker question bubbled up from the depths of his consciousness. Who could have done this? What kind of person would be cruel enough to throw a living being into a flooding river? The thought made his blood boil, adding fuel to his desperate sprint. Just when it seemed like the sack was about to vanish forever into the fierce current, luck finally tipped in their favor. The river curved gently, guiding the sack closer to Mike's side of the bank. His heart jumped. This was the break he needed. But he knew the chance would only last for seconds. Ahead, the riverbank dropped off into a steep slope. Beyond that, he couldn't follow. It had to be now. Mike gritted his teeth and pushed his aching legs to go faster. With everything he had left, he lunged forward, arm outstretched, fingers wide, reaching with all his might. For one breathtaking second, he thought he had it. He could almost feel the coarse burlap scraping his fingertips. But just then, the current surged with a cruel twist. The sack slipped away, just beyond his grasp. "No!" Mike shouted, his voice cracking with frustration and disbelief. He stumbled to a stop at the edge of the bank, powerless as the sack was pulled farther downstream, the faint whimpers growing more distant. "Sarah!" he yelled, panic rising in his throat. "Get the kayak! We have to catch it!" At that instant, Sarah's fears vanished. She didn't hesitate or question what she had to do. All she could think about was the poor creature trapped inside that sack, still fighting to survive. She gave a sharp nod and sprinted toward where they had left their kayak. As she ran, her thoughts flashed back to how they ended up in this terrifying situation. The memory of their morning argument came rushing back, Mike's thrill-seeking energy clashing with her deep concern. Just hours earlier, Sarah had firmly disagreed with her husband's plan to kayak the Blackstone River. Normally calm and peaceful, the river had turned wild after the heavy rains. It was swollen, fast, and littered with branches and debris, exactly what the evening news had warned about. "Mike, I don't think this is smart," she had said, her voice filled with worry. "The current's going to be way too strong for us to control anything out there." But Mike's eyes had lit up with excitement. "Come on, Sarah. Where's your sense of adventure? We trained for this back in college. Don't tell me you're already out of practice." For half an hour he had cajoled and persuaded, appealing to Sarah's adventurous side. Against her better judgment, she had finally relented, swayed by Mike's enthusiasm and the promise of an unforgettable experience. Sarah, a medical school graduate known for her careful nature, had always found kayaking a peaceful escape from her stressful work routine. But this was far beyond what she considered relaxing. The thunder of the water had nearly drowned out her usual sense of caution. Mike, a former college kayaker who thrived on risk, had painted an irresistible picture of the adrenaline rush they'd feel conquering the swollen river. It was that same daring spirit that had first drawn Sarah to him when they met at a kayaking club last year. "All right," she had finally said, her voice laced with a blend of excitement and unease. "But we stay together, okay? And if anything feels off, we get out. No arguments." Mike's face had lit up with a huge grin as he slapped her a high five. "That's my girl. Trust me, this is going to be epic." But once they reached the river, their reactions couldn't have been more different. Sarah stared in disbelief at the raging waters, while Mike still had a smile stretched across his face, undeterred by the chaos before them. "Mike, I'm telling you, this doesn't feel right," Sarah had repeated, eyeing the surging river nervously. "The current is way too aggressive." "Come on, we've got this," Mike said, steadying her as he helped her into her life jacket. The moment they launched from shore, Sarah felt the full force of the current take over. It grabbed their kayak like it had a mind of its own, yanking them downstream at a terrifying pace. Logs and debris zipped past, some close enough to make her flinch. "Mike!" she had screamed over the roar. "This is way too dangerous. We need to get out. Now!" They had fought the raging flow with everything they had, arms burning as they tried to steer toward the bank. But the river was relentless, dragging them deeper with every second. Now, as Sarah shoved their kayak back into the wild current, her heart pounded as she steered toward Mike's position. He stepped down to his waist and grabbed hold of the kayak's edge to steady it. Then, in one swift motion, he pulled himself aboard. The moment Mike settled in, the river seized the kayak and hurled them forward. What had started as a rescue turned into a pulse-pounding race. They paddled not to go faster, but just to survive the narrow, violent path ahead. The river foamed around them, sharp rocks jutting out like nature's own obstacle course. Sarah, positioned at the front of the kayak, shouted out instructions. "Turn right. No, now left." Her voice strained to rise above the thunder of the river. Mike reacted instantly, his muscles flexing as he maneuvered their kayak through the maze of jagged rocks. Even as danger surrounded them, Mike's thoughts spun with questions. When they hit a short stretch of calmer water, he called to Sarah, hoping her background in animal biology could shed some light. "Sarah," he shouted, "if the sack's floating, is whatever's inside still in danger?" Sarah's eyes darted over the river, tracking every ripple and obstacle. "Absolutely," she yelled. "Water could be getting in. There's also hypothermia, and if it hits rocks, it could get hurt." "How long does it have?" Mike asked, urgency creeping into his tone. Sarah shook her head, her face tense. "Hard to say. Maybe a few minutes. Maybe an hour if we're lucky. Depends on air and how cold the water is." The answer only intensified their focus. They worked together, using the current's momentum to speed their pursuit. The sack was now visible, tumbling through the rapids ahead. It bobbed and vanished behind waves, only to pop back up again, each time pulling at their nerves. As they drew closer, a new problem emerged. The same current helping them now threatened to sweep them right past it. "Sarah, be ready," Mike called from behind. She nodded quickly and leaned forward, hands shaking slightly as they neared the sack. Her fingers skimmed the wet knot at the top. For a second, she thought she had it, but the sack struck a submerged rock and jerked out of reach. "No!" Sarah cried out, frustration cracking in her voice. She lunged again, stretching as far as she could. This time, her hand gripped the fabric, but when she tried pulling it closer, the kayak tipped alarmingly. Water splashed over the edge, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like they might capsize. Mike shifted his weight fast, steadying the kayak just in time. Sarah dropped back into her seat, gasping for breath. The sack slipped ahead of them once more. A wave of helplessness threatened to wash over them. The challenge felt impossible, the danger all too real. But then Mike looked at Sarah, and something inside him lit up again. Even with fear on her face and her hands trembling, she was already leaning forward, bracing for one more try. Her determination struck a chord deep in him. Energy surged back into his body. "We can do this," he said, his voice steady and determined. Sarah nodded, their eyes locking for a second as a silent agreement passed between them. They pressed on, fully focused on the task ahead. Mike's thoughts raced, searching for another approach. Then, suddenly, a plan came to him. "Sarah," he called, "what if we get alongside the sack instead of chasing it from behind? Let the current push us together." Sarah mulled it over, then nodded quickly. "Let's try it." They shifted their direction, aiming to ride parallel with the sack. But the wild river fought them every step of the way. Each time they got near, a swirling eddy or an unexpected rock forced them off course, sending the sack just out of reach again. Mike's frustration built with every failed attempt. His jaw tightened as he fought off the hopelessness creeping in. Noticing Mike's growing tension, Sarah forced herself to think fast. Then an idea struck. "Mike!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I've got an idea!" Before he could answer, she carefully extended her paddle to the side, reaching toward the sack. It was a risky move, one wrong shift, and they could tip. But Sarah focused everything on keeping her balance. Realizing her plan, Mike adjusted his paddling. He used smooth, controlled strokes to steady the kayak while nudging them closer. Slowly, inch by inch, they narrowed the distance. Sarah's arms trembled as she held the paddle in place. The sack was right there now. She could see the worn burlap threads, soaked and frayed. With one last surge of energy, she lunged forward, her hand locking onto the knot at the top. "I got it!" she shouted, her voice full of triumph and disbelief. Mike whooped with joy and quickly moved to help her haul the heavy soaked sack into the kayak. They could feel something moving inside, small and alive. Exhausted but exhilarated, Sarah and Mike shared a look of accomplishment. They had done the impossible, but they soon realized they were a long way from home. As they caught their breath, Sarah glanced around, taking in their surroundings. "We came quite a way," she panted, still winded from their ordeal. They had traveled nearly 2 miles downstream from their starting point, the powerful current having carried them all the way to the outskirts of Riverdale, a small town nestled along the river's edge. "But look, there are some people over there. Maybe they can help," she added. Mike nodded, following her gaze to a pair of kayakers prepping their boats nearby, clearly drawn by the wild rapids. "Let's see what we've risked our necks for first," he said, his tone a mix of nervous curiosity. Sarah's hands trembled as she untied the knot. She carefully pulled back the damp folds, and what they saw left them stunned. 6 tiny, soaked bundles of fur spilled onto the grassy bank, newborn puppies. Their eyes were still sealed shut as they wriggled and whimpered faintly. Their wet fur clung to their chilled bodies, each one trembling from the cold. Despite the exhaustion weighing on them, both Sarah and Mike felt a new rush of urgency. Gently, they wrapped the puppies in Mike's jacket and made their way toward the kayakers. "Excuse me," Sarah called out, her voice strained but firm. "We need help. These puppies were in the river, and they need care right away." The kayakers, a middle-aged couple named Tom and Lisa, rushed over in shock. "Oh my God," Lisa said, eyes wide as she saw the tiny pups. "What can we do?" "Do you have a car nearby?" Mike asked quickly. "We need to get them to a vet, fast." Tom nodded without hesitation. "Our SUV's just up the path. We'll take you wherever you need to go." With no time to waste, they all rushed to the vehicle. Sarah cradled the jacket full of puppies close to her chest, while Mike filled Tom in on what had happened. Tom drove swiftly but carefully, while Lisa pulled up the nearest animal hospital on her phone. "It's about 15 minutes from here," she said, already dialing. "I'll tell them we're coming." By the time they reached Riverdale Animal Hospital, the staff was ready and waiting. "Bring them in, quickly," said Dr. Elena Martinez, the lead vet, motioning them straight into an exam room. Sarah and Mike gently placed the bundle on the table, unwrapping Mike's jacket to reveal the 6 soaked puppies. Lisa gasped at the sight, her eyes filling with tears. Dr. Martinez and her team worked quickly, checking each puppy's vitals and beginning emergency treatment. "They're hypothermic and dehydrated," she said, her tone focused but calm. "We need to warm them gradually and get fluids into their systems." Hours passed with Sarah and Mike waiting anxiously alongside Tom and Lisa. At last, Dr. Martinez emerged from the treatment room with a reassuring smile. Sarah leaned into Mike, exhaustion and relief flooding over her. Lisa stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You two are heroes," she said quietly. "Those little pups wouldn't have survived without you." Mike shook his head. "We just did what anyone should do." As the adrenaline faded, the reality of the day's journey settled in, and so did a practical problem. "Our car," Sarah murmured, suddenly remembering. "It's still upstream, over 2 miles away." Lisa didn't hesitate. "Don't worry about it. Tom and I will drive you back. It's the least we can do after everything you've been through." During the ride, the couples chatted, quickly bonding over their shared love for kayaking and the unexpected rescue. When they reached the launch site, Sarah and Mike spotted their car, a sight that brought a fresh wave of relief. Tom pulled up beside it, and they all stepped out. Sarah turned to Lisa, giving her a warm hug, while Mike shook Tom's hand. "Thank you both," Sarah said, her voice full of gratitude. "We couldn't have done this without you." "We're just happy we could help," Tom replied. "Please keep in touch and let us know how the puppies are doing." As Sarah and Mike got into their car, they fell silent for a moment, each lost in thought, thinking about the puppies, the river, and how a day of adventure had turned into something unforgettable. The next afternoon they returned to the clinic. The moment Dr. Martinez appeared, her wide smile said it all before she even spoke. "They're going to make it," she announced as she walked over. "All 6, still weak and dehydrated, but they're fighters. We think they're around 7 days old." Sarah and Mike wrapped each other in a tight hug, pride and joy swelling in their hearts over the lives they had helped save. Meanwhile, at the front desk, the receptionist carefully examined the form filled out by the couple regarding the admitted puppies and found it to be quite fascinating. After persuading them, she convinced them to share the story of how their paths crossed with those adorable puppies. Impressed by the touching and inspiring tale, she decided to share the video online, unknowingly propelling the couple to overnight fame. In the days that followed, the river rescue story captured hearts throughout the region. Messages of support and offers to adopt the puppies came pouring in, especially from the small but dedicated Oxbridge Animal Control Office. Sarah and Mike visited the puppies as often as possible, filled with joy as they watched the tiny creatures grow stronger day by day. New milestones brought smiles and tears, eyes blinking open for the first time, unsteady little steps, and playful yips that filled the clinic with life. After giving it serious thought, the couple decided that the best path forward wasn't to keep the puppies themselves, but to ensure they were raised in a place fully equipped for their needs. So they contacted Oxbridge Animal Control, who gladly agreed to take over care once the puppies were fully stable. As Sarah scratched behind the ears of the smallest pup, now lovingly named River, she couldn't help but reflect on how everything had unfolded. What started as a spontaneous kayak trip had transformed into something extraordinary. It had reminded her, and everyone touched by the story, of how deeply one brave act can ripple outward. The puppy's journey was just beginning. With every passing day, they moved closer to finding warm, loving homes and a future filled with promise. And for Sarah and Mike, the memory of that incredible day on the river would always stand as proof of what ordinary people can do when they choose courage over hesitation and kindness over comfort. What a thrilling ride! What would you do if faced with such a challenging situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.